Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 321 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. Ryan Hoover of Handgun Hunters International is on the show with us today to talk about hunting with a handgun. Now, Ryan is the director of Handgun Hunters International, and I'm excited to talk to him about this topic because, to be quite frank with you, I don't know hardly anything about hunting with a handgun, but fortunately he does. He has some good stories to share with us, along with some interesting and useful information about hunting with a handgun. Before we dive into that, make sure you head over to huntingguns101.com, sign up there to get my free ebook on the best hunting calibers. Okay, let's get started talking to Ryan about handgun hunting. Ryan, it is great having you on the show today. Thanks a lot for joining us. To start out with, can you introduce yourself to the audience and just tell everyone a little bit about yourself, and then we can dive into the details of hunting with a handgun?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me today, John. So my name is Ryan Hoover. I'm the director of Handgun Hunters International. I have been a long-time hunter. I'm a former, or as I say, recovering custom gun maker. I did that for 15 years. And I am a passionate advocate for handgun hunting. So I picked up handgun hunting as basically leaving the rifle at home a few years ago, even though I had been handgun hunting up to that point. And I have just become so enthralled with it as a way to just improve a lot of things about myself that I'm, as I said, very passionate and love just sharing kind of the message of what you can do with handguns. Now, we're going to get into it, but there are a lot of myths out there. And one of my favorite things to do is to kind of confront those and dispel them where I can.
Well, very good. I love dispelling myths as well. Like you and I were discussing before we started recording, I am primarily a rifle hunter. I hunt with a muzzleloader, some as well, and I own multiple handguns. I shoot handguns a lot. I've never hunted anything with them. I shoot them for fun. I carry them for personal protection. Even I have heard things about handgun hunting and handgun hunters and whatnot. And so it'll be good to talk to someone that has been there and done that and can dispel some of these myths and maybe set people on the right track and provide maybe some good guidance and framework for someone that is interested in getting started with a handgun or is an active handgun hunter and wants to join a community. But before we jump into that, can you share an interesting story involving a handgun hunt with the audience?
Absolutely. It's tough to choose between my favorites because one of the aspects of being a handgun hunter that I believe and a lot of our members and people in my community will bear out is that you get that really excited feeling almost every hunt, every successful hunt. You kind of feel like you're doing it for the first time. At least that's how a lot of us feel. Mm-hmm. And so but what I would choose that's very memorable is I was hunting in South Texas with a good friend of mine on his lease, and we were pig hunting in the spring. The pigs had not been cooperating as they often do when they're being pressured. And so we were kind of coming up short, and it was the next to the last morning, and he and I had dropped off the other hunters who were hunting on stands, and we were sitting in the truck on the top of the hill. And this is a working cattle ranch. So they had a molasses bucket, which is like, it's a bucket that you buy. It has a lid on it, and you pull the lid off, and cows come up to lick the sweet molasses, and it's got minerals in it that the cattle need. Well, as you can imagine, that is just magnet for a pig. And for some reason, even though it was, getting light, there was a boar who walked up the hill and started eating of that molasses bucket, and there was nothing else in his world besides that bucket. Now, we saw him from probably 420 yards away, and I was able to get out of the truck. I was carrying my 357 Black Hawk Bisley on my belt, and I had my 223 Contender with me for longer shots. But I was able to get out of the truck and kind of work my way down through the gully, past an old barn, I mean, it was just like every step, for anybody who's ever stalked close, it's okay. Everything is just the next thing, right? Like you're going to get to the barn, you're going to get to the tree, you're going to get to the fence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had done this hop skit for probably about 30 minutes and got to the point where I was at the fence that was probably 60 yards away from him, but he was skylined, so I couldn't take the shot. So I, as gingerly as I could, climbed the barbed wire fence. All the while, if he sticks his head up, I'm totally busted. Climbed the barbed wire fence, got over, realized that I was close enough that I didn't want to use my contender. Not that I couldn't have. If you can get an iron sight kill, it's so much more fun, in my opinion. So I had my shooting sticks and I crawled up the hill, and he finally turned himself to where I could, the backstop. He had a backstop behind him so I could shoot. At 47 yards, I drew my 357, laid it across the sticks, drew a bead just right behind his shoulder, pulled the trigger. He squealed and started running. And I don't know if you've ever hunted in South Texas, but there are thorns that you just cannot get through. And so he started making for those thorns, and I was like, oh, better put another one in him. So I tracked him again, a little less than 50 yards. He's running from my right to my left. I'm so full of adrenaline. I talked to him, or I pulled the trigger again, and he did a front flip and just died.
Whew.
And I was so stoked. I mean, just like my wife always gives me a hard time for not getting excited, but I let out a whoop and a holler, I was like a kid. And it was just so cool. The whole experience, like being out there, seeing an animal that far away, being a hunter enough to get that close to it, and then making good shots on the pig to where he was humanely dispatched. I mean, it was just great. We later found out my first shot would have definitely been lethal. I just didn't want him to get to that stuff that I couldn't get into. And my second shot hit him right in the neck, and that is what rolled him over. And it was really cool because it was the first hunting handgun I ever bought. It was ammunition that I had reloaded myself. I had put in the time to practice to do it. It all came together, and it was an amazing.
That is super cool. Now, to recap, you said that was a Ruger Blackhawk in 357 Magnum with iron sights you shot him with?
Mm-hmm.
And
it was indeed, yeah.
And what was the distance on your first shot?
47 yards.
Whew, man, that is quite a shot with a handgun.
It is until you get into it a little bit. That's one of the things that the thing about handgun hunting is it's similar to bow hunting is the amount of work that the hunter commits to doing before the hunt as far as practice is concerned. And so, in my world, 47 yards is about an average.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at that from the perspective of a guy that doesn't hunt. I have, especially some stuff that's maybe a concealed carry handgun or something that is got a shorter barrel and whatnot.
Right.
And, 5, 10, 15, 25 yards is about as far as most people ever shoot.
Sure.
Now, you mentioned a minute ago that you had a TC Contender. Did I hear that right?
Correct. Yeah, I do have. I have a Contender and an Encore and several barrels for them.
Okay. And so I can certainly see how handguns like that, and we'll dive into the equipment aspect of it later, handguns like that in particular, you put a scope on them and whatnot, you can have a much longer effective range with one of those than the iron-sighted handgun off the shelf that most people normally think of when they think of a handgun.
Correct. And this is what I used to always tell people when I was a custom gun maker, is barrel length has nothing to do with accuracy. It only has something to do with velocity.
Mm-hmm.
So you are, and on top of that, I always use this as an example. I have an old box of 22 short ammunition from Remington, the old green box. Now, obviously, I do not hunt big game with that caliber, but on the box, it says this cartridge is lethal up to and including 1/2 of a mile away or 880 yards. Now, whatever you want to say, maybe, how likely it is that that's going to be kill shot every time. But that's just an example of we think of the range thing and the lethality thing in kind of a box that might not necessarily be true as far as the capability is concerned. And from my perspective, I have never met a handgun hunter, and I know some handgun hunters that are leagues above me as far as ability, that can outshoot his gun, meaning that he could be accurate with his gun further than his gun would be lethal.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. That's the case with rifles too.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So that was a really cool story, and I appreciate you starting us off with that. Let's talk a little bit about the basics of handgun hunting. So you mentioned when you were telling that story that one of the things that you liked about hunting with a handgun was the challenging aspect of it, and the fact that you made a good analogy to hunting with a bow, where it requires so much upfront preparation just to become competent at it, that almost any level of success is that much more magnified in how satisfying it is when you get an animal. You talk to just a regular hunter with a rifle or something. They have a scope 30-06. It'd be cool to shoot a hog at 50 yards, but it's not something to get super excited about. Not any more so than anything else that you would do with a rifle, it seems like. But at least from the outside looking in, it seems like everything associated with shooting a handgun accurately and precisely at any kind of distance, especially doing it on a live animal, is magnified compared to a rifle. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I did a poll of handgun hunters a while back, and one of the top reason that was most given for why they engage in our sport is the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, I don't really know any handgun hunters who aren't also gun cranks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, we like our gear, we like our collections, we like experimenting, finding new things, putting different sights and scopes and grips and blah, 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 and calibers on all kinds of stuff. So it's all kind of a natural gravity well that draws this kind of person who is really into the gear, which means you're going to be more likely to go practice.
That's a good point. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the difficulties associated with hunting with a handgun compared to hunting with a normal centerfire rifle? And then once we cover that, we can go into some of the advantages of going that route.
Oh, absolutely. So with a rifle, you have that third point of contact, your shoulder being an effective brace and being able to pull the rifle into your shoulder makes even an offhand position much more steady with a rifle. Being able to key the comb of that stock into your cheek to lock your eye into the scope, that makes that aspect much easier as well. With a handgun, even though, like I said, barrel length doesn't affect accuracy, but sight radius is a big deal. And when you have a handgun and you're shooting it, especially with open sights, it takes such a minuscule movement to make you way off at distance compared to a rifle. I mean, it's a simple lever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the two biggest ones. And I mean, aside from the fact that you do have to work at it. When I was a gunsmith, I would get plenty of people who came in. They used the same box of shells for the last 5 years, and they did just fine because shooting a rifle out to 100 yards, which is most of where the distance at which we hunt in my area. But you can't do that with a handgun, because handgun hunting, or handgun shooting rather, is a much more perishable skill.
When I was a young man, I remember one of the first times I ever went out to shoot a handgun seriously. I had received a new Glock 22 as a present. I don't remember what the occasion was, but I had this pistol, and I was at the range with my dad, and we were shooting rifle out there that day, and I was like, I want to try out this new pistol. And I put up a target at 25 yards, and I was like, bam, 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 bam. I shot 10 rounds off and I went down there and none of the rounds had even hit the paper. And I was like, holy cow, this is a whole lot harder than I thought it would be. I was hitting bullseyes out here all day at 100 yards with my rifle. And my dad was like, well, yeah, I mean, that's a long shot with a pistol. And he used to work for Customs. He was a handgun instructor for them. And he squared me away after I was willing to listen to him after I embarrassed myself out there. And I started doing much better, but that was an excellent example of just how, imperfections in your trigger squeeze in particular. And that was what was getting me out there, can just easily get you off the paper. And this was not a super subcompact gun or anything. It was a full-size Glock. But man, it was definitely an eye-opening experience. And so you make a good point about how difficult it is, but at the same time, how that inspires people to take it more seriously than they might otherwise. What are some of the other advantages of hunting with a handgun?
Well, obviously, the biggest one is that it's small, and you can, a lot of people say handgun hunting is like bow hunting, and as far as the hunting style, that's true. Trying to get close, having practice, etc. But you can't put a bow on your hip and climb a fence or a tree or whatever. And no matter how large the handgun, and there are some pretty big handguns that go into the field, they're still smaller than your average rifle and can be carried on your pack or in your holster or whatever. And so you have more opportunity for hands-free in the field. To me, the biggest advantage to handgun hunting to me is personal achievement. And I'm just speaking from my personal experience with it. When I decided to pick up a handgun and leave the rifle at home, it was during a time in my life, it was high anxiety. It was kind of one of those moments where it was, what am I doing with myself? Is this what I really want to be doing, et cetera? And I was suffering severely from a flinch caused by target panic. And through the rehearsal of those skills, I was able to, and it's still an ongoing process, overcome and see how I could go from being one way, setting a goal for myself, achieving it, feeling that sense of pride that you get when you do achieve or succeed at something you've worked at. And so it started making me think, like, what else could I do in my life? I was able to do this. This is not an easy thing to overcome, an anxiety-induced target panic flinch. And so for me, it was the sense of just being better and gaining a skill that not a lot of people have. That's a less practical aspect of why the advantages of handgun hunting, but that is the thing that has made me the most passionate about it, and the thing that I always try to evangelize about.
You make a good point with that as well. In this same vein, I know Arizona has their special handgun archery and muzzleloader season for certain species. Are you aware of any other quote-unquote special seasons like that specifically for handgun hunters?
There are some. For instance, Arkansas recently instated they call it an alternative firearms season. And basically what it is was they are now allowing handguns during the muzzleloader season. So it gives handgun hunters an extra week to hunt in Arkansas. And there are various, a lot of Midwest states have something similar. It does change some over time, but if you're hunting in an area that's typically like a highly populated area, like there's a slug only. But to tell you the truth, there aren't a lot of places where where there's a handgun only season. Mm-hmm. It's usually, like a bow season and then a regular firearm season and sometimes a primitive weapon season. But most of the time, and we kind of looked into this, there weren't, because when we first started HHI, we were like, where are some areas that we might be able to get involved with to promote a handgun hunting season? And when we looked around, there aren't a lot of places where there's a special season that handguns could be tagged onto, or that there's, the willingness of people to section off a week of rifle hunting for handgunners. So typically in a firearms season, you're going to be allowed to use your handgun, and that's going to be where it is. Now, when you get into what kind of handgun you can use, those are where you need to check your specific restrictions. For instance, I'm pretty sure Illinois is like this, where you have to have a straight wall cartridge of a minimum caliber. I know that Arkansas's new rules also say straight wall cartridges. You can't use a bottleneck cartridge. So, for instance, my 223 Contender would be out of the running in Arkansas during that season. And so those are where you see more regulations as far as what kind of handguns can be used.
Yeah, in that vein, I seem to recall somewhere someone saying that in the so-called quote-unquote straight wall states like Indiana, Illinois, I think Iowa, a lot of those regulations started out being, hey, it's supposed to be a handgun cartridge that's straight walled that you use, and it has since morphed into people being able to use rifles in chamberings that fit those same restrictions. So in a straight wall situation, I'm assuming that depending on the details, something like a 10 millimeter, a 357, a 44 Magnum, all those would be allowed for use.
Correct. Yes. All the way up to, right now 4570 is very popular, and a lot of those locales are allowing the use of that in a lever action or a single shot rifle as well.
Mm-hmm. And while you were talking about the different hunting seasons, I seem to recall that Idaho has a specific quote-unquote short-range season where, like you were saying, you can hunt with a muzzleloader, then you can hunt with a handgun, then you can hunt with probably archery and whatnot as well. So yeah, there are some ways that you can do that, but it does seem to be, for the most part, you're hunting with a handgun during rifle season.
Correct. Yes, that's true.
In terms of international travel, I'm pretty certain that some places like Canada, just hunting with a handgun is just a complete no-go, but I'm sure there's places where you can hunt with a handgun, and they are somewhat popular destinations for handgun hunters. Do you know offhand any places like that?
Oh, absolutely. And so then you get into what is that country's definition of a handgun. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, the most popular international place for handgun hunters to go is Africa. And depending on which country you're in, they will have certain restrictions, like barrel length, whether or not it can be a semi-auto, that kind of thing. Some of the larger single-shot handguns, the Encores and the Contender platforms, those can be, if you get one that has a 14 or 15-inch barrel, then that may fall under some area that they're like, well, it's not really a handgun, so we'll let you bring it in to hunt with. I don't know. Do you know who Mark Hampton is?
I don't.
Yeah. Mark Hampton is probably the most prolific handgun hunter alive today. He's written 3 books on it, including a book where he details going to all the different countries he's gone to. I mean, he's handgun hunted in China.
Wow.
And I mean, it was not recently, but and I've talked to him about this. A lot of times when you're going internationally, it's going to depend not only on the stated regulations of that country, but the opinion, attitude, and mood of the customs officer or the game officer. Just so that's why we always suggest use a booking agent, use somebody who knows that area if you're going to try and handgun hunt there. But yes, there are, like I said, Africa is the most popular one to do, but there are some, I know there are some places in Europe and some places especially in Eastern Europe, there are some places, Argentina is a tricky one. It's a great place to go hunt, but it's very tricky to get your handguns in there. And those are, some of the golden ones that you read about in the books that people used to do, like in Australia and whatnot, they've closed handgun hunting. So yeah, depending on where you want to go, if you're going international with a handgun, Africa's the place to start.
Okay, fair enough. You've touched on this a couple of times, but talk to us a little bit about some of the most popular handgun models for hunting and some of the reasons why some people would want this one versus that one.
Sure. So, you know, everybody is kind of in their camp, right? And that was one of the things that I'm not into the siloed version of our sport. I am into, if you use a handgun, you're a handgun hunter, whether or not it's this kind of handgun or that kind of handgun.
Mm-hmm.
So it highly depends on a person's tastes. I divide it into really three categories: semi-autos, revolvers, and specialty pistols. So semi-autos, obvious, your Glock 40s, 1911s, stuff like that. Specialty pistols would be the Contenders, the Encores, the old XP 100, some of the more modern versions of that, the CVA pistol or the Cauger Arms pistol. Those are kind of the sections that I break it down into. The single most popular handgun hunting gun is the revolver, though. And consistently we've seen through our polling and surveys that revolver is far and away the most popular way for people to get into handgun hunting. And that's makes sense based on what you see the industry doing. Smith & Wesson has several handguns in that line. Taurus has several handguns in that line. So it's a difficult question to answer as far as here's the single most popular and important one, because there are so many good models out there. Here's what I would say about that. Mm-hmm. First, start with learning about it, because I have seen too many people turned off of handgun hunting because, let's face it, we're a minority in the hunting community, and so it's not as well known as it could be. So there's a likely scenario that's played out many times of a would-be handgun hunter going into a big box store, and they have the newest, fanciest 500 X-frame or 460 Raging Hunter or whatever they have in there, and the salesman pulls it out and says, well, this is what you need. And likely as not, that guy has never strapped on a handgun and gone in the field his entire life. Now, I don't mean to impugn those that have, but I'm just saying that is not the place to learn about it generally, unless the shop is known for catering to handgun hunters. So when you are looking to get into it, don't think that you have to start at the most punishing, biggest, baddest Magnum out there. What I always tell people, white-tailed deer is the most popular hunting in America, and they are not hard to kill. If you do your job, they will go down. So it is easy to get a flinch if you have a large caliber, and that's where you start. And I always say one round of .357 put in the right spot makes a deer a lot deader than 6 rounds of .44 Magnum that all missed or made terrible shots because you had a flinch. Mm-hmm. So any good, reputable manufacturer has these offerings. Some of my personal favorites, I love Ruger guns. Rugers have been the stalwart guns of handgun hunters forever because they're so overbuilt. They are like tanks. They are very difficult to blow up, as it were, and you'll see in loading manuals these loads are for Ruger only. Buffalo Bore sells Ruger only loads. That's because those guns are built like tanks. So that's usually where people do start, is finding a Black Hawk or a Super Black Hawk or a Red Hawk and going into the field with that. Now, that being said, I love the Contenders. I love the Encores. I used to build custom XPs. I love those. And an underserved but definitely viable segment of handgun hunting is the semi-autos. So we have a few members who have done extensive testing with different calibers of semi-auto, and there are some very capable ones out there. Generally, they need a little more work to make them field accurate, but there's definitely ability. Now, when you're choosing your gun, you're going to want to absolutely tailor your hunting scenarios to the capabilities that you have and that gun has. And, I'll tell you another, this kind of goes back to what we were saying as far as one of the downsides of handgun hunting is if you go practice and you've done your time at the range and you've set your maximum range with that gun at 50 yards and the deer of a lifetime steps out at 60 yards, you got to have the capability to tell yourself no. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the most challenging things about it. And so all I'm saying is, as far as gun selection, it's a rabbit hole. It's a varied topic, but as far as you got to kind of tailor what you're interested in to the kind of gun that you initially go with. But further, we all have some kind of handgun that we can go hunting with. Now, I am not by any means suggesting pull out your 380 pistol and go deer hunting. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there is a type of hunting to fit every type of handgun out there. You know, I love small game hunting, rabbits, squirrels, etc. If you're good enough with your compact pistol to successfully hunt rabbits, that is a completely transferable skill into your self-defense. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times I hear people like, well, I want to go handgun hunting, but I'm saving up for this 44 Magnum or this 357, whatever. And turns out they probably have an opportunity to at least get in the field with what they have.
You know, you talked a minute ago about how you liked Rugers, and Ruger, especially when they got started, was a textbook example of finding a niche in the market, a couple different niches in the market that weren't really being served by the big brands like Winchester and Remington. And they go in there and they start with the Ruger Blackhawk. And there weren't that many places making good single action, high quality revolvers at the time. And they go in there and they just dominate that space, and then they move into the 22 space and this and that, right? And all those things from it. And then only later did they introduce their bolt action rifles and whatnot to compete with the Model 70 and all that. Another area where they really just established that incredible beachhead was in the 22 market, not only with the 1022, but with their 22 automatic pistols as well. And when I told you earlier I had never hunted with a handgun, I realized as you were talking about that was actually untrue, that I have killed grouse in the Pacific Northwest with a 22 pistol, doing exactly what you were talking about. I shot a couple of them with a rifle, and I thought, that's fun. That's cool. But I got this nice little 22 pistol. It's, not that much different in terms of the ballistics of it. I'm getting reasonably close range shots on these grouse. Let's see if I can shoot one with a pistol. And I did, and it was really cool. And so you make a really good point about starting small like that, because there's lots of good 22 pistols out there, many of them made by Ruger, but they're not the only ones. The Browning Buckmark, I know, is another nice pistol along those lines that's not that expensive. Ammo isn't expensive. It doesn't recoil hardly at all. You go shoot a squirrel, a rabbit, a grouse, or whatever with it. That's a great way to get started.
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, one of my favorite guns, I have a Mark III Target with a little red dot on it. And I start and end every range session with that gun. And I carry that in squirrel hunting very often. I love that. My kids shoot that gun. It's such a training tool. And one thing I want to say about 22s is you never graduate from 22s. 22s are not a stepping stone to larger calibers, because they are going to be useful to keep your skills sharp and to keep your pocketbook fat by not having to buy all that other expensive ammo. So absolutely. And as you say, that's kind of the gateway into this world, is what kind of, just looking at it from the perspective of what can I do, even if it's not strap on a Blackhawk and 45 Colt and go deer hunting.
Now, in terms of things that are popular, effective, and legal for big game in most jurisdictions, is that 357 Magnum, is that kind of your single most popular kind of big game cartridge like that, at least on the lower end?
No, the single most popular big game cartridge is a 44 mag, far and away.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And actually, I would say popular based on sales, but I'm not. I would say this probably carries over into actual popularity as well. The reason I mentioned the 357 is because in the handgun hunting world, we've long had this debate about whether or not the 357 was enough to be a viable cartridge. And I'm here to tell you through personal experience that as long as, again, you make sure that you stay in the capabilities of yourself on the gun, it absolutely is.
Well, and so that brings us to a good point concerning the ethics and the lethality of a lot of these cartridges. Now, it's a common thing to throw around foot-pounds of energy and whatnot around out there when you're talking about different rifle cartridges. And, I'm well aware that that's not a particularly useful way of talking about how lethal something is, right? Like you talked about, you shoot something in the foot with an elephant gun versus you shoot it through the lungs with a 22. Obviously, the 22 is more lethal in that way. But still, we're talking about cartridges here that are just simply much less powerful than many rifle cartridges. A 357 Magnum is probably producing a little bit more than 500 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle, and others are more powerful than that. But we're still talking about things that are significantly less powerful than a 6.5 Creedmoor or a 243 or something along those lines. And I know this is also going to play into the shot placement aspect of it as well, because that can also be very challenging with a handgun. Tell us a little bit about that side of thing. And I'm sure, you just alluded to a debate that goes on within the handgun hunting community with the 44 versus 357. So talk a little bit about that if you're approaching a guy that's a serious rifle hunter and he's like, well, I don't think this is powerful enough. How do you address that?
Well, in two ways. There have been instances of expedient use of certain cartridges that prove their efficacy way out of their current range. And what I mean by that is what immediately comes to mind in my head is there was a gentleman who was well known in the gun community and the handgun hunting community. His name was Elgin Gates. And he, in one of the first periodicals that HHI put out years ago when it was run by J.D. Jones, he put a story in there about how a Cape buffalo chased him up a tree and he was able to dispatch it with his 357 Magnum. When the 357 came out, they went hunting in Alaska and killed moose and brown bear with it. Now, please do not hear me saying that I think that is what you should go hunting with a 357. I absolutely do not. And some of those marketing things that we look askance at because they might not have been the best decision, the good part about it is it gives us data to say there's a capability there, right? And I always tell people, whatever you're hunting can only get so dead, right? There is a point past which all that energy and all that velocity and all that bullet staying together is meaningless because the animal has already expired. And so where is that minimum? And then how far above it are we? If back in the day, before we had well-regulated hunting seasons and people who cared about, keeping our deer population the way it is, it was a common practice for farmers to kill deer with 22s. And that, again, illegal now, good, and I think that's a great thing, but it just goes to show that a cartridge put in the right place is going to be more effective than trying to chase that energy, et cetera. Now, you definitely do have to take it in consideration depending on what you're hunting, but any animal on this planet that can be hunted has been hunted successfully with a handgun.
Do I understand correctly that earlier in your life that you were also a big rifle hunter?
I was. And I built a lot of custom rifles. And so I was always in that world of, talking to clients about energy and velocity and barrel length, et cetera, et cetera.
So as someone that has, say, shot deer with high-powered rifle cartridges and with a handgun, have you noticed a difference in the way they react to the shot, how far they run, how long it takes them to die, that sort of thing?
Absolutely not. Not one bit of difference at all.
And so is this a case where you just show a video of a guy shooting a deer with a handgun and just don't tell him that the hunter is using a handgun and it runs 50 yards and dies? The guy wouldn't even necessarily know that that the hunter was using a handgun?
Absolutely. And if you just see a video of an animal being shot with a handgun, there is no way, a good shot, obviously, there is no way you'd be able to tell the difference. And I would say I would be careful about showing people videos of handgun hunting, because in my opinion, there's been some bad press out there of people trying to do stunts, and that not everybody should try and do, and they probably shouldn't try to do it. So it's not just always like what I'm saying is don't go on the internet and just type in handgun hunting and take everything you see for red. But I mean, that's the same with everything on the internet, right?
Well, that is true, right? There's people that do that with the rifles, or people do it with bows and all of that. Yes. I hate stunts and, but what?
Same.
Fair enough. Now, yeah, so we've talked a couple about some of the handgun. We have talked a little about some of the handgun specific cartridges or cartridges that are more primarily used in handguns. I know that you can use a 44 Magnum in certain rifles and 357, that sort of thing. But the Thompson Center Contender and Encore are handguns that you can use more traditional rifle cartridges in as well, right? Like a 30-30 or 308, that sort of thing.
Oh, absolutely. So I have a barrel for my Encore in 7mm 08, a traditional rifle cartridge, 15-inch barrel. I have barrels for my Contender in 223, 30-30, 730 waters, and I think that's it. I have too many barrels to like all. But the Encore pistol, I mean, the sky's the limit. I mean, they sold barrels in 300 Win Mag, and so I mean, there's no reason that if you really want, and then if you really want it, you couldn't have it in a handgun platform. Now you deal with a lot of trying to put a square peg in a round hole, in my opinion, where you're not going to burn all that Magnum powder, et cetera. But then you go to the bolt action pistols like the XP100, and any caliber that can be chambered in a rifle can be chambered in those guns.
What would you consider to be your personal max effective range as you and I are talking right now with a couple of the different handguns that you use often?
So I would say right now the range at which I feel comfortable shooting the farthest and with what gun would probably be my 730 waters barrel for my Contender, and a 730 waters is a 30-30 next down to 7mm. And I feel confident out to about 160 yards with that. I also have a 41 Magnum with a scope on it that I've made kills out to 110 yards with. And so, yeah, that's for me. Those are capable at a lot longer ranges, but that's my personal max right now.
Yeah. And that seems to be one of the other popular things about the Encore and the Contender is that I know they're not the only handguns that you can put a scope on, but it seems like it's very popular to put scopes on them. And due to the nature of them, you can have a pretty long barrel on it, and they're just more compatible with those bigger, actually rifle cartridges like the 730 waters, like the 30-30. It seems like, at least from my perspective, the 730 waters was much more popular in handguns than it ever was in rifles.
Oh, absolutely. Winchester did chamber their 94 for it for a while, but the 730 waters is one of those sweet spot cartridges for the Contender. It punches above its weight, and Thompson Center didn't get every dimension right on all of their Contender barrels, but they absolutely did on that. And so it just does things that you wouldn't expect it to do. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. One is it takes, like the VMAX bullet is one that I think of a lot. And if you drive that bullet too fast, it's just going to explode on impact. But in the 730, it drives it at a range that turns it more into a controlled expansion bullet. And it can do that with a lot of bullets that may not be the best choice for rifle velocities, especially in Magnum cartridges, but in the 730 and a 14-inch Contender, it's amazing. So there's that. There's also the fact that it's a very mild recoiling cartridge. It is a very pleasant to shoot cartridge. So people who are not fans of recoil, which I totally understand and support, that is a great option for them. I have personally heard of people using that gun with a good scope, a good rest, a lot of practice to cleanly take animals out to 250 yards and beyond.
Ooh, man. And so with your rifle, what weight VMAX bullet are you using and how fast are you pushing it? Or excuse me, with your handgun. I'm so sorry.
Sure, yeah. That's all right. Oh no, don't worry, I'm not sensitive. We're all on the same team here. That VMAX is a 120, and I'm pretty sure my load is 2,100, 2,200 feet per second.
So
somewhere in that range.
So Hornady makes a load for the 300 Blackout with 110 VMAX going about 21, 2,200. So yeah, that seems to be the sweet spot for it. And so that's an interesting thing about these handguns shooting rifle cartridges like that with, for the most part, it seems like you're getting slower velocities with them because even a long handgun barrel, I mean, you said what, 15 inches thereabouts? So if you use a bullet that's too tough or one that's designed for a 30-06 or something, it's not going to be going fast enough to really expand. And so you get the opposite problem. You try and use a handgun bullet in a rifle sometimes. But I can definitely understand why something like the VMAX would be so darn popular in a moderately powered cartridge like the 730.
Exactly. And I have had the opposite experience with that as well, because as you know, the monolithic bullet, the all solid copper bullets are very popular right now, and they're doing some cool things. But I was trying to shoot what is the Hornady? 130 grain. The Hornady, I cannot remember the name of their monolithic bullet.
The CX.
Yeah, the CX. Thank you. 130 grain CX and the 130 grain Barnes TTSX bullets. And Hornady lists 2,000 feet per second as the minimum impact velocity for their CX bullet. And my load was going, again, probably 2,100 at the muzzle. I shot an Axis buck at about 45 yards with that. And fortunately, I made a good shot, so he didn't go but 30 yards and piled up. But it was a pencil hole all the way through his heart, and it did not expand whatsoever. And so I thought, okay, I need to either drive these a little faster or stick with those VMAX.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it seems like with the handguns, you're up against a pretty low velocity, maximum velocity threshold with it. So yeah, it seems like the more traditional lead core bullets or the VMAX may be the way to go then.
That's true, depending on what the bullet was designed for, right? There are a lot of monolithic handgun bullets out there now that do just fine at handgun velocities. Cutting Edge is the one that comes immediately to mind as making some good ones. And so it really is, I know you know this. I mean, I've seen you do a lot of research and testing and comparisons. It's very difficult if someone were to sit you down and to say, explain to me how people named cartridges, right? Then, you'd be like, well, how long do you have? Because this is going to take a while. And so that it is, and this is always what I've been harping on my entire career about. It depends. And I hate that answer, but it just depends on your gun, your load, your capabilities, the bullet, how it was made. Fortunately, there's enough information out there these days to give everybody a good starting point. But for instance, that CX bullet, I've yet to try it just because I haven't been shooting it as much, but I bet I could get enough velocity out of my 7mm 08 barrel in my Encore to shoot those just fine.
Mm-hmm. Now,
so it's yeah.
For the audience, the Encore is like the bigger brother to the Contender. It's a little bit more modern, a little bit stronger action, and you can use more powerful cartridges in it.
Yes, correct. And it weighs a pound more, and it was rated up to, I've seen an Encore in like the Nitro Express cartridges even.
Ooh,
not that that's fun, but yeah. And I have a buddy, one of our members, who has an Encore. It's a pretty heavy gun, but he has one in a 450 Marlin, and a couple of guys actually. So yeah, it opens the world to a lot more powerful cartridges, especially for those recoil junkies out there.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Now, you mentioned earlier the fact that handguns are just a lot lighter, more compact, easier to carry than rifles. You also mentioned most people that when they think of carrying a handgun, think of carrying it on a hip holster. What are some of the most popular ways that serious handgun hunters will carry their handguns? I'm sure some of them carry it in a hip holster. Are chest holsters pretty common too?
Oh, absolutely. Chest holsters are a great way to distribute the weight, carry a gun all day. It's also the best way, in my opinion, to carry the big guns. There are chest holsters available, for the Contender and Encore. It takes a pull out of your chest, but it can hold them. So holsters is another highly personal choice, and it depends on to me, like, so for instance, cross draw holsters that you wear on your non-dominant side with the handle or the grip facing to where you could grab it with your dominant hand, like Doc Holliday did in the movie Tombstone. Those are very popular, but I've had people say, well, if I ever get into a situation where I have to belly crawl somewhere, I feel like it's more likely to fall out. So I don't wear cross draw holsters because of where I hunt. There's guys that say, a bandolier type holster, which is like a chest holster, but carried lower on your side. So it's really personal. My preferences are, to tell you the truth, we're all kind of still kids and we like the idea of having a gun on our hip. It makes us feel like the people we saw in the movies. And, my grandpa was a big John Wayne guy. So I grew up watching a lot of his movies and you just feel cool with a gun on your hip. But so I have lots of hip holsters. And to tell you the truth, myself and a lot of guys in my community, we usually will, if we're on a serious hunting trip, like something we've booked and we're out hunting pronghorn or whatever, we'll take two guns. And one of them is going to be your long range gun in case you can't close the distance. And then the other one's going to be your packing gun in case you can. I have a wonderful chest rig that holds my 7.5-inch Blackhawk Bisley Hunter with a loopholed, unfortunately now no longer available, handgun scope on it. And that's a big revolver. And I have a chest holster made for me by Randy Miller that just makes it so I could carry it all day. I could put it on my shirt and put a jacket over it. I could put it over a jacket. It's just, that's how I usually prefer to carry it. And then I'll carry a 22 on my hip in case, I see a squirrel or a rabbit or something like that.
So if you carry your handgun on a chest rig, where do you carry your binoculars?
So there are various solutions to that. The way that I do it is my binos just go on top of it. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me at all. Or just kind of off to the side. I'm right-handed, so my gun slants from my right shoulder down to my left hip. So I'm able to find a little spot where my left breast pocket would be and tuck my binoculars there. But yeah, it definitely limits the bino harness capability. But there are bino harnesses that incorporate holsters in them as well. Okay. You're typically limited to smaller guns with that, because putting a big old holster for a contender and adding a bino case to it is a little difficult. But my best friend that I hunt with all the time, he carries his pistol behind his bino harness and doesn't have any issues.
And what are things that hunters will commonly do if they are carrying like a big backpack, like if they're backcountry hunting or something?
Mm-hmm. So typically, unless that hunter is doing a two-gun hunt where they're going to have the longer range, like for instance, I have a friend who hunts a lot out west, and he takes his XP 100 and 7mm 08, which is a bolt action single shot pistol set up for longer range shooting, and he'll carry that in his backpack, and then he'll carry whatever revolver he's wearing on his hip. And actually it's one of the things about handgun hunting that's another advantage. I see all these shows with guys walking through the backcountry with their rifles, sticking out of the back of their pack, and I get that. It is tough to carry a rifle on a sling up a hill for as long as they're walking. But with the handgun, you are free to access that firearm regardless of if you're in packing in mode, packing out mode, walking to your hunting area mode. So if it does give a lot more opportunity in case something spontaneous happens and you encounter an animal before you're really where you were going.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. You make an interesting point with the two-gun hunts, and I had actually never even considered that until you mentioned it. Is that a pretty common practice among handgun hunters?
It is among a lot of the guys that I talk with. Again, being gun cranks, the more we can have with us, the more fun it is for us. You should see it when we get together. It's like there's just so many cases coming out, and they just keep coming out because we always just want to see what everybody else has and show it off. And I know we're not the only community like that, but it's just a very defining feature of us. So I think that's part of it. You know, when you go and you plan and you pay for a hunt where you may or may not be able to close the distance, you know, I know people who have shot pronghorns at 30 yards because of, you know, that's not common, but that's a crazy thing that can happen. And I know people who have shot pronghorns at many hundreds of yards. And so if there's a lot of the thinking is like, okay, if I'm going to make the effort to do it, a lot of guys will say, well, I definitely want to be able to take a pronghorn with this gun. But if it's the last day and I haven't been able to get within 200 yards of a pronghorn, I'd rather come home with a pronghorn than have to use this gun. And that's the thinking that goes behind it.
Does carrying two different guns like that and the associated ammo for them kind of defeat the purpose of at least the weight savings aspect of hunting with a handgun versus a rifle?
Absolutely. Totally. 100%. Yeah. By that point, it's a typical, you know, most of the guys that I know that are well-seasoned guys. And, but yes, absolutely it does. However, you know, a lot of times, depending on where they are, the situation, they can leave some gear back at camp and still have some of the weight savings. But yeah, it absolutely does. And that becomes more about just wanting to do it than taking advantage of the weight.
Yeah. And even say if you have the same total amount of weight, but split up into two smaller packages, sometimes that is even still more convenient to carry than one big, long rifle, so to speak.
Cool. Yeah, right.
With the issues that Remington and Thompson Center have had financially in the last few years, do they make the XP100 anymore? Are you still able to get new model contenders and encores?
So that's a sad story. And the truth about it is, John, that handgun hunting, while I have heard about its growth through some surveys that have been done and some other people in the industry that I've talked to, it is a small subsection of handgun hunting. We have a lot of overcoming to do as far as getting media out on it being a feasible option. And so that has meant that the demand for hunting handguns has waned over the past, I don't know, probably even 15 years. And so, for instance, the XP was discontinued, I think, in 1998. The Thompson Center was bought by Smith & Wesson. They made them for a while, and then they just stopped making them for a while and put the company up for sale. And since Thompson Center has recently been acquired, and we've heard that they are going to start producing at least encores again, maybe next year. I'm not sure on that. But no, it's been an uphill battle for us wanting to have manufacturers offer firearms and equipment specifically tailored to us. Optics is another one. You know, Leupold recently discontinued their handgun scope line for good. I mean, it was kind of circling the drain there for a while, and that was a huge blow to us because they were always the gold standard, you know. Mm-hmm. But that's just how it is. So I think we're all left with, and even Ruger, you know, they do make, like, for instance, the Red Hawk. They do make the Red Hawk, but they don't make it in nearly the numbers they used to, and they don't make it as much as they do some of their other firearms. And if you look at it from a purely financial aspect, you know, if it takes 4 or 5 or more LCPs to equal your profit margin on a Red Hawk, you know, it's an easy choice, unfortunately. The good side of that is we do have some amazing, I guess I could call them boutique manufacturers, the smaller guys. Magnum Research makes the BFR, which is a fantastic revolver. Freedom Arms has been chugging along strong for many decades. They make probably the finest production revolver of all time. SSK, they recently introduced a clone of the Contender frame, and it mates with the G1 hardware, the Contender, the first iteration of the contender hardware and barrels. So there's a few lights at the end of the tunnel, but by and large, yes, we are having to, if you want a custom XP, you're usually cannibalizing one or you're buying a custom action. So yeah, that's kind of the state of the industry for us.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that has happened in the last really about 20 years or so now, as the federal assault weapons ban expired and as we have seen a growth in concealed carry, I guess over the past 30 years for concealed carry. Yeah, there's just, those have been, those two areas, black guns and concealed carry and self-defense handguns, have really grown their market share, and companies have started to focus on those market segments at the detriment of other parts of the market segment. A thing that I often lament about on this podcast is the fewer choices that we have now than used to be the case for high quality, dangerous game hunting rifles. There's just not what there used to be 20 years ago in that respect, due in part to those same issues that I just talked about that are also affecting the handgun hunting community as well.
Exactly.
Well,
yeah, and I think there's several aspects to that. It's the guys who are really skilled. I mean, it takes a lot of skill to build those guns. Those guys have retired or passed on. But I don't mind that. Like I totally embrace, increased firearms ownership. And my kind of deal about handgun hunting that I've had to talk to people who are not familiar with handgun hunting, but also people who are older and have been handgun hunting for a lot longer than I've even been alive, is we got to bring those people in. If you get a self-defense handgun, like I said, there is probably an opportunity for you to use it in the field. And I don't think, this is just my opinion, I don't think there's any training scenario that you can manufacture that more closely matches the heart racing, adrenaline pumping situation of having to use your pistol or rifle defensively as hunting. Because if you get, your heart rate starts going when you see an animal, when you get closer, the buck fever thing, and that is fantastic real world training for can you react quickly? Can you make an accurate shot? Can you control your breathing? And all that stuff is a 100% transferable skill into that other world.
that is a very good point. Now, over the last hour, we've talked about what a small community this is, a lot of the niche aspects of it with the products and the way you go about doing things and how it's different from many other forms of hunting, even hunting with firearms, and how the random guy at the gun store usually doesn't know that much about handgun hunting and it can be a hit or miss source of information on the gun that you need to buy if you're going to start hunting with a handgun. Tell us about Handgun Hunters International and how you are a useful resource like that to people, especially that are just getting started, but people of all experience levels of handgun hunting.
Sure. Handgun Hunters International was actually started by J.D. Jones in 1979. It went on for 37 years and was shut down because he was nearing retirement and the internet was taking off and making it difficult, because the key feature of HHI was the physical publication that went out every other month. Mm-hmm. And so I reached out and he gave me permission to revitalize it and bring it back. And so now it's an online community of handgun hunters. We have an awesome forum. We give away a lot. Like, we give away our publication, the Six Gunner. I have been working diligently over the past 3 years, I think, to scan and upload every single issue of the old Six Gunner to make that, not only make it available to people, but also to preserve that knowledge. And so we have that. We do, like, some of the perks of being a member, getting access to our members only forum. We have a giveaway every month that you're automatically entered into if you're a member. We give away guns, gear, and ammo. We've had a lot of cool giveaways there. But HHI's mission is to support and grow the handgun hunting community. So if someone reaches out to me and they're interested in it, they don't have to become a member for me to want to just give them all the information I have about how to get started, as far as I'll even connect them with people in their local area, because to me, it's more about the getting the word out than it is growing the membership. Now, I like growing the membership, don't hear me wrong, but I would rather you become a handgun hunter than an HHI member. And that is how most of us feel. I think it's great. Our community is so welcoming. The people that we have on our forum and the people that we have access to, you should see, like, when somebody has their first success in the field, or somebody comes on, and we've had a spate of this recently, of people saying, I'm new, I don't really know what I'm doing, what would you guys suggest about this? And we get people on there who are so encouraging. And most importantly, and how we differ, I think, a lot from a lot of other social media, is the advice is from people who've actually done it. Mm-hmm. They have pictures, they have data. Some of our guys are obsessive data collectors, and it's just such a welcoming and uplifting community. And like I said, if anybody wants to know anything about handgun hunting, my email is published on the website. My cell phone number is published on the website. I want to help people get involved in this sport in any way they can, because I've never introduced anybody into handgun hunting and had them say, I don't think I'll do that again.
Well, very good. Where can people go to learn more?
You can find us at handgunhuntersinternational.com, the second longest website address on the internet. And my email is ryan@handgunhuntersinternational.com. And you can go there. You can see about joining. You can find contact information. You can sign up to receive the free 6-gunner, both the classic 6-gunner that was put out for 37 years before I got a hold of it, and all of the publications the digital publications that we put out since then as well. Top of that, we also do a podcast called The Short Gun Sportsman. The first, I want to say 6 or 7 issues of that are dedicated to how to get into handgun hunting. And so that's a good resource for people as well.
Okay, well, very good. I'll put links to those things in the show notes. As we wrap up, do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share with the audience, or maybe emphasize any points that we talked about earlier that needed more discussion?
All I would say is, if you're at all interested, I can almost guarantee that you have a more accessible way to get into it than you might think. And please reach out to us, because we would love to help you realize how easy it is to get in and how rewarding it can be when you take it on and are successful at it. And I also want to say, I'm not trying to get people, a lot of us put the rifle down and don't touch the rifle anymore, or the bow. I don't have a dog in that hunt. If you want to rifle hunt and handgun hunt and bow hunt, great. You're welcome in our community. If you hunt with a 1911 or a classic Western revolver, great. You're welcome in our community.
Okay, well, very good. This has been a very enlightening and interesting conversation. I really enjoyed having you on the show today, Ryan.
John, thank you so much for having me. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that discussion with Ryan. I know I did. These are the sort of interviews that I feel like I always learn a lot about the subject and are also just really entertaining. So I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Now, you can learn more about Handgun Hunters International at their website. Links to their website, YouTube account, and Instagram account are all in the show notes. Check them out. Give them a follow. Heck, join the organization if you want to get plugged into a group of handgun hunters, regardless of whether you're just starting out down that track or if you're a veteran of many years hunting with a handgun and want to pass on some of the knowledge that you have gained to other people. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you sign up for my email list. To do that, go to huntingguns101.com. Sign up there to get my free ebook on the best hunting calibers. You'll get my ebook when you do that, plus you'll also start to receive the emails I send out every day. If you like the podcast, you will love those emails. Make sure you are getting them too. Go to huntingguns101.com. Sign up there. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to the BigGameHuntingBlog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.